Elena's hands trembled as she scrubbed the last of the silver platters, the kitchen bustling around her with frantic energy. Tonight was the Alpha King's victory celebration, and every servant in the castle had been working since dawn to prepare for the grandest feast the realm had seen in decades. She had been perfectly content to remain in the kitchen, invisible among the steam and chaos. That was where she belonged after all. Elena had learned long ago that staying hidden was safer than drawing attention. Servants who kept their heads down lived longer, ate better, and slept without fear. But Cook had other plans. "Elena!" The woman's sharp voice cut through the clatter of pots and pans. "Get yourself cleaned up. We're short-handed in the Great Hall tonight." Elena's stomach dropped. "But Cook, I'm not trained to serve the nobles. I'll only make mistakes." "Nonsense." Cook waved a flour-dusted hand dismissively. "You've got steady hands and you know how to keep quiet. That's more than I can say for half these girls. Now go find something decent to wear." 20 minutes later, Elena stood before a cracked mirror in the servants' quarters, barely recognizing herself. The borrowed dress was simple but clean, a deep blue that brought out her eyes. It was finer than anything she'd ever worn, and yet she knew it marked her as clearly as a servant's uniform would. The fabric might be beautiful, but it couldn't hide what she was. The great hall took her breath away. Hundreds of candles cast dancing shadows across stone walls, hung with the royal colours, and the air hummed with conversation and laughter. Noble lords and ladies filled long tables that groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh bread, and wine that cost more than Elena earned in a year. And at the head of it all sat the high table. She had heard whispers about the Alpha King, of course. Everyone had. Stories of his strength, his victories, his mysterious nature. Some said he could shift into a wolf larger than a horse. Others claimed his eyes could see straight into a person's soul. Elena had always assumed they were just stories, the kind servants told to make their lives seem more interesting. But as she balanced a heavy tray and wove between the tables, she found herself stealing glances toward the high table, curious despite herself. She saw him before she understood what she was looking at. He sat with perfect stillness while chaos swirled around him, his dark hair catching the candlelight. He wasn't the largest man in the room, but something about his presence commanded attention even when he wasn't speaking. The other nobles leaned toward him when he spoke, hung on his words, sought his approval with every gesture. Elena told herself to look away, to focus on her duties. She was nobody, a kitchen servant carrying wine to people who wouldn't remember her face 5 minutes after she left. She had no business staring at the Alpha King like some lovesick fool. But then he turned his head. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, and the world stopped. Elena's breath caught in her throat. His eyes were storm grey, intense and searching, and they held hers with a focus that made her feel like the only person in the room. Something shifted inside her chest, warm and golden and entirely unfamiliar. It was as if a thread had been pulled taut between them, vibrating with energy she didn't understand. The sensation was so strong, so unexpected, that Eleanor stumbled backward. The tray tilted in her hands, wine goblets sliding toward the edge with musical clinks. "Careful there!" a lord's voice cut through her daze as wine sloshed onto the table. "Clumsy girl, watch what you're doing!" Heat flooded Elena's face as nearby nobles turned to stare. She mumbled apologies, frantically trying to right the goblets and mop up the spilled wine with her sleeve. But even as she worked, she could feel those storm-grey eyes on her, watching with an intensity that made her skin tingle. When she finally dared to glance up again, the Alpha King was still looking at her. He wasn't smiling, wasn't frowning, just watching, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle that only she could answer. Someone at his table spoke to him, drawing his attention away, and Elena seized the moment to flee. She all but ran from the great hall, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. What had just happened? She pressed her back against the cool stone wall of the corridor, trying to catch her breath and make sense of the golden warmth still humming in her veins. It had been nothing. A moment's eye contact with a powerful man who probably hadn't even really seen her. She was imagining things, letting the grandeur of the evening and the fine dress go to her head. But as she stood there in the shadowed hallway, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. That golden thread still seemed to stretch from her chest back toward the great hall, pulling at something deep inside her with a gentle, insistent pressure. She closed her eyes and took a shaky breath. Tomorrow this would all be a memory. The celebration would end, the nobles would return to their lives, and she would go back to the kitchen where she belonged. Tonight was just a moment out of time, nothing more. Yet even as she told herself this, Eleanor knew with a certainty that terrified her that the man with storm-grey eyes would not be so easily forgotten. Whatever had passed between them in that crowded hall, it was only the beginning. The golden thread hummed softly in her chest, and for the first time in her life, Eleanor wondered if being invisible was really what she wanted after all. Eleanor spent the rest of the evening hidden in the kitchen, helping with the endless stream of dishes while trying to forget storm-grey eyes and the impossible pull she'd felt. But the golden thread refused to be ignored. It hummed beneath her skin, a constant reminder of something she couldn't name and didn't dare hope to understand. She barely slept that night, tossing on her narrow cot as the celebration continued in the great hall above. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, felt that moment of connection that had seemed to reach into her very soul. By morning, she'd convinced herself it had been nothing more than imagination run wild. The kitchen was quieter the next day, the staff moving slowly as they recovered from the late night. Elena threw herself into her work, scrubbing pots with unnecessary vigour and trying to lose herself in the familiar rhythm of kitchen duties. She belonged here, in the steam and the chaos, where no one expected anything from her, beyond steady hands and a willingness to work. She was bent over a particularly stubborn pot when the kitchen fell silent. Elena looked up to find every servant frozen in place, eyes wide with shock. Following their gaze, she turned toward the kitchen entrance and felt her heart stop. The Alpha King stood in the doorway. He was even more imposing up close, his presence seeming to fill the entire room despite his stillness. He wore simple clothes today, a white shirt and dark trousers that somehow made him seem more dangerous, not less. Without the formal robes and crown, he looked younger, but no less powerful. Those storm-grey eyes swept the kitchen until they found her. Eleanor. Her name on his lips was like a physical touch. She realised with a start that she'd never told him her name, had never spoken to him at all. Cook was the first to recover, dropping into a hasty curtsy that the rest of the staff quickly copied. "Your Majesty, we weren't expecting, that is if you need something from the kitchen. I need to speak with Elena." His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of something that made Elena's skin tingle. Privately. The silence stretched until Elena thought she might scream. Every eye in the kitchen was on her, speculation and shock written across familiar faces. She wanted to disappear into the stone floor, to wake up and find this was all a terrible dream. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He stepped into the kitchen, and Eleanor noticed how everyone else instinctively stepped back, giving him space while she remained frozen by the wash basin. "I think you do." His eyes never left hers. "I think you felt it too." The golden thread pulsed, warm and insistent. Elena pressed a hand to her chest, trying to still the racing of her heart. "I felt nothing." Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. "Nothing?" Heat flooded her cheeks. How could he make a single word sound like such an intimate question? "Your Majesty, I'm nobody, just a servant. Whatever you think happened last night was the most important moment of my life." He said it simply, as if commenting on the weather, but the intensity in his eyes made Eleanor's knees weak. "I've been looking for you." The phrase hit her like a physical blow. Looking for her? That's impossible. You don't even know me. I know that you have kind eyes and gentle hands. I know that you work harder than anyone in this kitchen and ask for nothing in return. I know that when our eyes met last night, something in my chest came alive for the first time in years. He took another step closer, close enough that she could smell cedar and winter air on his skin. And I know that you're everything. Elena couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. Kings didn't seek out kitchen servants. They didn't speak of destiny and connection to girls who scrubbed pots for a living. I'm nothing, she managed. Nothing at all. No. The word was firm, absolute. You're everything to me. The golden thread blazed to life between them, and Elena saw the exact moment he felt it too. His eyes widened slightly, and he reached toward her before catching himself. I don't understand any of this, Elena said, her voice breaking. I don't understand what's happening to me. Neither do I. His honesty surprised her. But I know I need to find out. Have dinner with me tonight. The request sent shockwaves through the kitchen. Elena heard someone behind her make a small, strangled sound. Your Majesty, I can't. It wouldn't be appropriate. People would talk. People always talk. His voice was patient, but there was steel underneath. I'm asking you to dine with me, Elena, not as your king, but as a man who very much wants to know the woman who has turned his world upside down in the span of a single glance. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct she'd developed over years of survival screamed at her to refuse, to remember her place, to protect herself from a hope that could only lead to heartbreak. But the golden thread sang between them, and she found herself drowning in storm-grey eyes that held promises she didn't dare believe. Just dinner, she whispered, just dinner. But the way he said it made it sound like everything. Nothing more. Only what you choose to give. His voice was gentle now, coaxing. I'll wait. However long you need, I'll wait. Elena looked around the kitchen at the shocked faces of her fellow servants, at Cook, whose mouth hung open, at the familiar walls that had been her world for so long. She thought of safety and invisibility and all the reasons she should say no. Then she looked back at him, at the patient hope in his eyes, and felt the golden thread pull taut between them. All right, she breathed, just dinner. The smile that transformed his face was radiant. Thank you. He looked around the kitchen, seeming to suddenly remember they had an audience. I'll send someone to help you prepare, tonight at sunset. He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. Elena? Yes? The blue dress you wore last night, it was beautiful on you. Then he was gone, leaving Elena alone with a kitchen full of stairs and a golden thread that hummed with possibility. Cook was the first to break the silence. Well, she said faintly, I suppose we'll need to find you something to wear. Eleanor pressed both hands to her chest, feeling the steady pulse of the golden thread and trying to process what had just happened. In the span of 10 minutes, her entire world had shifted again. Tonight she would dine with the Alpha King, not as a servant, but as... what? She didn't know. But for the first time in her life, Eleanor found herself eager to find out. The dress they found for her was green silk, simple but elegant, with long sleeves that made her feel less exposed. Elena's hands shook as she touched the soft fabric. She'd never worn anything so fine, and the weight of it felt like wearing someone else's life. The Alpha King's private dining chamber was smaller than she'd expected, intimate rather than grand. Candles flickered on a table set for two, casting warm light across walls lined with books. It felt more like a sanctuary than a throne room, and Elena found some of her nervousness easing as she took in the comfortable space. He stood when she entered, and she noticed he'd changed as well. Gone were the formal clothes of kingliness. Tonight he wore a simple black shirt and dark trousers, looking more like a man than a monarch. The effect was somehow more devastating than any crown could have been. You look beautiful, he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her cheeks warm. "Thank you." She gestured awkwardly at the dress. "It's borrowed, like everything else I've worn around you." "It's not the dress that makes you beautiful, Elena." He pulled out her chair, waiting patiently until she sat before taking his own seat across from her. "Though green is definitely your colour." Dinner began awkwardly. Elena hyper-aware of every movement, every bite, every word. But gradually, as wine softened her edges and his easy conversation drew her out, she began to relax. He asked about her life in the kitchen, her childhood, her dreams. Simple questions that no one had ever thought to ask her before. "Tell me about the wars," she said when she'd exhausted safe topics about herself. "The ones you fought. Everyone speaks of your victories, but no one mentions the cost." Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of old pain. The cost was everything that mattered. He set down his wineglass, his fingers tightening around the stem. "I lost my father when I was barely 20. Had to take the crown before I understood what it meant. Spent the next 5 years fighting to keep the kingdom from falling apart." That must have been terrifying. Terrifying, lonely, soul-crushing. He looked directly at her. "I haven't had a conversation about anything real in years. My advisors tell me what they think I want to hear. The nobles flatter and scheme. Everyone wants something from the king." Elena felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of shared isolation. "I know what that's like, being invisible. People look through you like you don't exist." "Exactly." His voice was soft, wondering. "How did you know that?" "Because I've lived it every day of my life." She met his eyes, seeing understanding there. "You're surrounded by people who see your crown. I'm surrounded by people who don't see me at all." "I see you." The words were fierce, certain. "From the moment our eyes met, you're the only one I see." The golden thread pulsed between them, warm and insistent. Elena's breath caught as she recognized the truth in his words, felt it echoing in her own chest. "I don't understand what's happening to me," she whispered. "This feeling, this connection, I've never felt anything like it." "Neither have I." He leaned forward, his hand moving across the table toward hers, before stopping just short of touching. "But I know I don't want it to stop." Elena stared at his hand, so close to hers, feeling the warmth radiating from his skin. Slowly, carefully, she moved her own hand forward until their fingers touched. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm. The golden thread blazed to life, and she gasped at the intensity of the connection. She could feel his heartbeat, his breath, the careful control he was maintaining to let her set the pace. "You see me," she said, wonder in her voice. "The real me." "You're the only one I see." He turned his hand palm up, and she slipped her fingers into his. "Elena, I need you to know something. I've never believed in fate, in destiny, in any of the romantic nonsense poets write about. But this," he squeezed her hand gently, "this feels like coming home." Tears pricked at her eyes. "I've never had a home." "You do now." The promise in his voice made her chest tight. "If you want it, if you'll have me." They talked for hours, sharing pieces of themselves neither had ever given to another soul. He told her about the loneliness of leadership, the weight of decisions that affected thousands of lives. She told him about nights spent hungry, about learning to make herself invisible to avoid the attention of cruel masters. "You're so much stronger than you know," he said, as they moved to sit by the fire, the formal dinner abandoned for the intimacy of shared confidences. "I don't feel strong, I feel terrified." Elena curled into the corner of the settee, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting. "This thing between us, it's impossible. I'm nobody, you're the king. People will say—" "I don't care what people say." "But I do." Her voice broke slightly. "I care because I know what it's like to be talked about, whispered about, judged. I can't be the reason your crown is questioned." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the firelight. "What if I told you that my crown means nothing if I have to wear it alone?" The words hit her like a physical blow. She could see the truth of them in his eyes, the loneliness that mirrored her own. "Don't say things like that." "Why not, if they're true?" "Because they make me hope." The admission was torn from her. "And hope is dangerous for someone like me." "Someone like you?" His voice was gentle but firm. "Someone brave enough to speak truth to a king? Someone kind enough to see past a crown to the man underneath? Someone strong enough to survive on her own from childhood? Eleanor, you are extraordinary." Before she could protest, he continued, "I know you don't believe it yet. I know you think this is some kind of mistake, that I'll come to my senses and realize you're not worthy of my attention. But you're wrong." Elena's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back all evening. "What if you're the one who's wrong? What if I disappoint you? What if I'm not enough?" "Impossible." He reached up to brush a tear from her cheek, his touch gentle as a butterfly's wing. "You could never disappoint me. You're everything I never knew I was looking for." The tenderness in his touch broke something loose inside her. Before she could think, before she could second-guess herself, Eleanor leaned into his hand. The kiss was inevitable, soft and sweet and full of promise. Elena had never been kissed before, had never imagined it could feel like this, like coming alive, like finding a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. When they finally broke apart, she was trembling. "Elena?" Her name was a prayer on his lips. "I'm scared," she whispered against his mouth. "So am I." His forehead rested against hers. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." They sat in the firelight, foreheads touching, breathing the same air and feeling the golden thread weave them together more tightly with each passing moment. "What happens now?" Elena asked. "Now you stay." His voice was certain, sure. "You stay, and we figure out the rest together." But even as Elena nodded, even as she felt herself falling deeper into this impossible love, a cold voice in the back of her mind whispered warnings. This was too good to be true, too perfect to last, and when it inevitably fell apart, the landing was going to destroy her. The golden thread hummed between them, warm and reassuring. But Eleanor had learned long ago that warmth could disappear without warning, leaving nothing but cold and the bitter taste of shattered dreams. She would stay, but she would also guard her heart, because some lessons were too painful to learn twice. The days that followed were a whirlwind of confusion and wonder. Elena found herself caught between two worlds, no longer quite a servant, but not yet understanding what she was becoming. The Alpha King had arranged for her to have quarters in the castle's guest wing, rooms grander than anywhere she'd ever dreamed of staying. Yet she still took her meals in the kitchen, still felt more comfortable among the servants than the nobles, who whispered behind silk fans whenever she passed. Those whispers followed her everywhere now. Elena tried to ignore them, but fragments cut through her attempts at composure. A servant, thinking she can be queen. It won't last. These infatuations never do. Mark my words, he'll tire of her soon enough. Each comment was a small cut, but they accumulated like death by 1,000 paper wounds. Elena began to see calculation in every smile, judgment in every glance. The borrowed dresses felt heavier each day, reminders that she was still playing dress-up in a life that didn't belong to her. She saw less of him during the day now. Kingdom business demanded his attention, pulling him into meetings with advisers and audiences with visiting dignitaries. Their stolen moments had to be carved from the margins of his impossible schedule. A quick conversation in a corridor, a shared meal when duties permitted, touches that lingered longer than propriety allowed. But it wasn't enough. The golden thread stretched taut between them whenever they were apart, a constant ache that made concentration impossible. Elena found herself counting hours until she would see him again, then hating herself for the weakness. 3 weeks after that first dinner, everything changed. Elena was walking through the castle's portrait gallery, trying to escape the latest round of whispers, when she heard voices from the adjacent receiving room. She should have kept walking, should have minded her own business. But her own name stopped her cold. The girl is a problem. The voice was smooth, cultured, unfamiliar. Your Majesty's attachment to her is becoming a source of concern among the nobility. Lord Aldrich speaks wisely. Another voice, this one with a harsh edge Eleanor recognised. Lord Blackwood, a man who'd visited the castle before, always bringing an air of barely contained cruelty with him. The people need to see their king with an appropriate consort, someone of proper breeding and station. Elena's blood ran cold. She pressed closer to the partially open door, straining to hear the response. Lord Blackwood. The Alpha King's voice was deadly quiet. I believe I've made my position clear. Elena is under my protection. Of course, Your Majesty. Blackwood's tone was oily with false deference. But perhaps you don't know the full truth about your little pet. Elena's heart stopped. What truth? The girl is a thief, Your Majesty, was accused of stealing from her previous master, Lord Ravenscroft, fled in the night rather than face justice. Surely you cannot mean to associate the crown with such questionable company. The silence stretched until Elena thought she might scream. When the Alpha King finally spoke, his voice was ice. That is a serious accusation, Lord Blackwood. I trust you have proof? Indeed. Blackwood sounded pleased with himself. Lord Ravenscroft himself is here, with documentation of her crimes. Perhaps you should hear his testimony before making any permanent decisions about the girl's future. Eleanor didn't wait to hear more. She ran, her borrowed slippers silent on the stone floors as she fled toward the only sanctuary she knew. The kitchen was empty at this hour, the staff preparing for the evening meal. She collapsed on a stool by the hearth, her hands shaking as the implications crashed over her. Lord Ravenscroft. The name alone was enough to make her stomach turn. Her former master, a man whose cruelty had driven her from his household in desperation. She remembered that terrible night, the missing silver, his accusations, her desperate flight with nothing but the clothes on her back. She had been innocent. The silver had been found the next day in the possession of Ravenscroft's own son, a gambling debt paid with stolen family heirlooms. But Elena had already vanished into the night, and no one had bothered to clear her name. Now he was here, in the castle, spinning his lies to anyone who would listen. And why wouldn't they believe him? He was a lord, and she was nobody, had always been nobody. There you are. Eleanor looked up to find the Alpha King in the kitchen doorway, his face a mask of controlled fury. He looked every inch the king in this moment, dangerous and commanding, and Eleanor felt the gulf between them yawn wider than ever. Is it true? His voice was carefully neutral. Which part? Elena's own voice came out steadier than she'd expected. That I was accused of theft? Yes. That I ran rather than face trial? Yes. Something flickered in his eyes. And the theft itself? I was innocent. The words felt hollow, inadequate. But I knew no one would believe me. I was just a servant and he was a lord, so I ran. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew how it would sound. I knew you'd look at me exactly the way you're looking at me right now. Elena stood, squaring her shoulders, like you're seeing me clearly for the first time. Elena, no. She held up a hand, tears threatening but not falling. I knew this would happen. I knew it was too good to be true. Men like you don't end up with women like me. Not really. Not forever. You're wrong. Am I? Elena laughed, the sound bitter. They're calling for my head out there. Your own nobles think I'm beneath you, and now they have the perfect excuse to get rid of me. A thief, a criminal, exactly what they expected from a servant who forgot her place. The Alpha King moved toward her, but Elena stepped back. The hurt that flashed across his face almost broke her resolve. I should go, she whispered, before this gets worse, before I damage your crown beyond repair. You're not going anywhere. His voice was absolute, commanding. I won't let you. You can't stop me. Elena's voice was getting stronger, anger replacing despair. "And you shouldn't. I'm exactly what they said I am. A problem. Someone who doesn't belong in your world." "Stop!" The word cracked like a whip. "Stop saying those things about yourself. Stop letting their poison into your head." "It's not poison if it's true." "None of it is true." He moved closer, and this time Elena didn't retreat. "You are not a thief. You are not a problem. You are not beneath me or anyone else in this castle." "Then why does it feel like I am?" The question hung between them, raw and painful. Eleanor could see her own hurt reflected in his eyes, could feel the golden thread stretching thin between them. "Because they're afraid," he said finally. "Afraid of what you represent, afraid of change, afraid of a queen who understands what it means to struggle." "A queen?" Elena's laugh was hollow. "Is that what you think this is? I can't be your queen. I can't even be in the same room as you without people talking." "Then we'll make them stop talking." The certainty in his voice made her look at him sharply. There was something different in his expression now, a resolution that made her stomach flutter with equal parts hope and terror. "How? By showing them exactly who you are, by making them see what I see when I look at you." He stepped closer, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Elena, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Elena stared into storm-grey eyes that had become her anchor in a world gone mad. The golden thread pulsed between them, strong and steady and real. Whatever came next, whatever price had to be paid, she couldn't walk away from this. Couldn't walk away from him. "Yes," she whispered, "I trust you." His smile was fierce, triumphant. "Then tomorrow we show them who you really are. Tomorrow I claim you before the entire court." Eleanor's heart stopped, then began beating double time. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that running is over, hiding is over." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "Tomorrow everyone will know exactly where you stand, where you've always belonged." "And where is that?" "By my side." He leaned down until his forehead touched hers. "Where you've been from the moment our eyes met, where you'll always be." The kiss that followed was fierce and desperate and full of promises that terrified Elena even as they set her soul on fire. Tomorrow would bring consequences neither of them could predict. Tomorrow would test everything they'd built together. But tonight, in the golden glow of the kitchen hearth, Elena chose to believe in impossible things. Chose to trust in storm-grey eyes and gentle hands, and a love that defied every rule she'd ever learned about her place in the world. The golden thread hummed between them, binding them together against whatever storm was coming. Together they would face it. Together they would survive it. Or together they would fall. The great hall had been transformed overnight. What should have been a routine morning court session had become something else entirely. Word had spread through the castle like wildfire that the Alpha King had called for a formal assembly, that accusations had been made, and that justice would be served. Elena stood at the side entrance, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched the hall fill with nobles, advisers, and curious courtiers. She wore the green silk dress again, the one from their first dinner, because it had felt like armour then, and she desperately needed armour now. Lord Blackwood stood near the front, his cruel smile visible even from a distance. Beside him Lord Ravenscroft looked every inch the wronged nobleman, his silver hair perfectly groomed, his bearing that of a man certain of his righteousness. Elena's hands clenched into fists at the sight of him. The man who had made her childhood a nightmare, who had driven her from his household with false accusations, now stood ready to destroy the only happiness she'd ever known. The Alpha King entered through the main doors, and the hall fell silent. He wore his full royal regalia today, the crown of state catching the morning light, his ceremonial robes marking him as king rather than man. Elena's heart clenched at the sight. This was the distance between them made manifest, the reminder of everything she could never be. But then his eyes found hers across the crowded hall, and for a moment she saw not the king, but the man who had kissed her in the kitchen firelight. The golden thread pulsed between them, steady and strong. "Lord Ravenscroft," the Alpha King's voice carried easily through the hall, "you have made accusations against one of my subjects. Step forward and present your case." Ravenscroft moved to the centre of the hall with practised grace. "Your Majesty, it pains me to bring this matter before you, but justice must be served. The girl Elena, whom you have taken under your protection, is a known thief. She stole precious silver from my household and fled in the night rather than face the consequences of her crimes." He produced a scroll with a flourish. "I have here documentation of her crimes, witness statements, proof of her guilt. I ask only that justice be done, that she be removed from your court before she brings further shame upon the crown." Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles. Elena felt the weight of their stares, their judgment, their certainty that she was exactly what Ravenscroft claimed her to be. "These are serious accusations," the Alpha King said, his voice carefully neutral. "What evidence do you present?" "Bills of sale for the missing silver, Your Majesty. Statements from servants who saw her near the family vault the night of the theft. Her own guilty flight, which speaks louder than any defence she might offer." Ravenscroft's smile was triumphant. "No innocent person runs from justice." "Indeed." The Alpha King's tone was thoughtful. "And tell me, Lord Ravenscroft, what happened to this silver after Elena left your household?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Ravenscroft's face. "It was never recovered, Your Majesty. Lost forever to her crime." "Interesting." The Alpha King gestured, and a side door opened. A man Elena didn't recognise stepped into the hall, his face grim. "Master Garrett, you were investigating merchant in Lord Ravenscroft's province, were you not?" "Yes, Your Majesty." The man's voice was clear, carrying easily through the suddenly tense hall. "I investigated irregularities in silver trading approximately 3 years ago." Elena's heart stopped. 3 years ago? Exactly when she had fled Ravenscroft's household. "And what did you discover?" "That silver bearing Lord Ravenscroft's family crest was being sold in gaming houses, Your Majesty. The seller was identified as young Master Ravenscroft, the Lord's eldest son. When confronted, the young man confessed to taking family silver to pay gambling debts." The hall erupted. Elena pressed her hand to her chest, hardly daring to breathe, as the truth she'd never thought would surface finally came to light. "Furthermore," Master Garrett continued, raising his voice above the commotion, "the young master stated that when the silver was discovered missing, his father chose to blame a servant girl rather than expose his son's crimes. The girl fled before the truth could come out, and Lord Ravenscroft saw no need to correct the record." "This is preposterous!" Ravenscroft's face had gone red with rage. "My son was protecting the family honour. The girl was still guilty of what?" The Alpha King's voice cut through Ravenscroft's sputtering like a blade. "Of being blamed for crimes she didn't commit? Of running from a justice that was never going to be fair? Of surviving however she could when those who should have protected her failed her?" The hall had gone deadly quiet. Elena could feel the shift in the room, the way the nobles who had been ready to condemn her now looked uncertain, uncomfortable. "Your Majesty!" Blackwood spoke up, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Even if these accusations are false, the girl is still unsuitable for your notice. Her birth, her station—" "Her station!" The Alpha King's voice was dangerously soft. "And what station is that, Lord Blackwood?" "She is a servant, Your Majesty, a nobody. Surely you cannot mean to associate the crown with—" "Enough!" The word rang through the hall with absolute authority. The Alpha King rose from his throne, and Elena felt the power radiating from him, the supernatural presence that marked him as Alpha, as king, as something more than mortal man. "You speak of station, Lord Blackwood, of worth, of what makes a person suitable for my notice." His storm-grey eyes swept the hall, touching each face before coming to rest on Elena. "Then let me tell you about worth." He stepped down from the dais, his movements fluid and predatory. Elena survived childhood as an orphan with no family to protect her, no fortune to ease her way. She worked harder than any of you have ever worked, asked for nothing more than the right to exist safely. She endured false accusations with dignity, faced exile with courage, and built a life from nothing but her own strength and determination. His voice grew stronger, more passionate. She has faced trials that would break most of the spoiled, pampered children in this room, and she emerged with kindness intact. She sees people, really sees them, regardless of their station. She has the courage to speak truth, even when it's difficult, the wisdom to understand suffering, and the strength to keep going when everything seems hopeless. He had reached the centre of the hall now, the same place where Ravenscroft had stood to make his accusations. But where the Lord had seemed small and petty, the Alpha King filled the space with power and certainty. "This woman is my fated mate." The words rang out like a bell, clear and undeniable. "She is the other half of my soul, chosen not by politics or convenience or strategic alliance, but by forces deeper than mortal understanding." Elena's breath caught as she felt the golden thread between them suddenly blaze to life, visible now to everyone in the hall as actual golden light that stretched from his chest to hers. Gasps echoed through the room as the supernatural bond manifested before their eyes, undeniable proof of their connection. The light was warm, beautiful, pulsing with the rhythm of their shared heartbeat. "You question her worth." The Alpha King's voice was fierce now, protective and proud. "She is worth more than all the noble blood in this room. She is worth more than crowns or kingdoms or any treasure you could name. She is my everything." He turned to face Elena directly, his eyes blazing with love and determination. Elena stepped forward. On trembling legs, Elena walked into the centre of the hall. The golden thread guided her, pulling her toward him with gentle insistence until she stood at his side. "I claim you," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Before these witnesses, before the crown, before all the forces of earth and sky, I claim you as my mate, my partner, my future queen. Any who question her honour question mine," he declared, turning back to address the hall. "Any who doubt her worth doubt my judgment. Any who seek to harm her will answer to me personally." The supernatural power in his voice made several nobles step back. Even Ravenscroft looked pale, his earlier bluster completely gone. "Lord Ravenscroft," the Alpha King continued, his tone deadly calm, "you have wasted my time with false accusations and malicious lies. You have attempted to harm an innocent woman under my protection. You are banished from this kingdom. Leave within the hour and never return." "Your Majesty, please." "The hour begins now." The dismissal was final, absolute. Ravenscroft fled, his dignity in tatters. Blackwood followed more slowly, his face dark with fury, but knowing better than to challenge the Alpha King directly. Elena stood in the sudden silence, hardly able to believe what had just happened. Around them, the assembled nobles looked stunned, uncertain, but no longer hostile. The golden thread of light still stretched between her and the Alpha King, beautiful and undeniable. "Elena!" His voice was gentle now, meant only for her. "Will you accept my claim? Will you stand beside me, not as my subject, but as my equal, my partner, my chosen queen?" Elena looked into storm-grey eyes that held her whole world. 3 weeks ago she had been nobody, invisible and forgotten. Now she stood in the greatest hall in the kingdom, bathed in golden light, claimed by the most powerful man in the realm. "I choose you," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Today, tomorrow, always, I choose you too." The smile that transformed his face was radiant. He pulled a ring from his finger, a simple band of gold that caught the light and seemed to pulse with its own inner fire. "Then wear my ring," he said, sliding it onto her finger. "Let all who see it know that you are mine and I am yours." The hall erupted in cheers, the mood shifting completely as the nobles realized which way the wind was blowing. Elena barely heard them. All her attention was focused on the man before her, on the ring on her finger that felt warm with more than just gold, on the golden thread that bound them together for all to see. "I love you," he murmured against her ear as he pulled her into his arms. "I love you too," she whispered back, finally able to say the words she'd been holding in her heart. The kiss that sealed their engagement was witnessed by the entire court, a public claiming that left no room for doubt or question. Elena was no longer the servant girl who hid in kitchens. She was the Alpha King's chosen mate, his future queen, a woman whose worth had been declared before all the realm. The golden thread pulsed between them, eternal and unbreakable, a visible sign of a love that had conquered doubt, defied convention, and proven that true worth came not from birth or station, but from the heart itself. 2 months later, Eleanor stood before a mirror in the royal chambers, hardly recognizing the woman who stared back at her. The gown was ivory silk shot through with gold thread, cut in the elegant lines of a queen. A delicate crown of intertwined silver and gold rested on her dark hair, catching the morning light that streamed through tall windows. Today was her wedding day. The week since their public engagement had passed like a dream. Elena had thrown herself into learning the duties of a queen, discovering a strength and capability she'd never known she possessed. She'd reorganised the castle's charitable works, ensuring that servants and common folk were treated with dignity. She'd sat in on council meetings, offering insights that came from having lived the struggles her future subjects faced daily. "You remember what it was like to have nothing," her future husband had said, just the night before, pride evident in his storm-grey eyes. "That makes you a better queen than anyone born to the role could ever be." A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Lady Margaret, who had become Eleanor's closest adviser and friend, entered with a warm smile. The older woman had been sceptical at first, like so many others, but Eleanor's genuine care for the people and her quick mind had won her over completely. "The chapel is ready, Your Majesty," Margaret said, the title still sending a small thrill through Elena. "The kingdom's greatest lords and ladies have gathered to witness your union." Elena touched the ring on her finger, the simple gold band that had become her anchor through all the changes. "Margaret, what if I'm not ready for this? What if I'm not strong enough to be what he needs, what the kingdom needs?" The older woman's expression softened. "My dear, strength isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling the fear and choosing to act anyway. You've already proven your strength 100 times over. But this is different. This is forever." "Yes," Margaret agreed, "it is. And that man waiting for you in the chapel, he chose forever with you, not with some perfect princess who's never known struggle, but with you, exactly as you are." Elena took a deep breath, feeling the truth of those words settle in her chest. The golden thread that connected her to her future husband hummed softly, a constant reminder that she was not alone in this. "Then let's not keep him waiting." The walk to the chapel felt both endless and far too short. Elena's hand rested on Margaret's arm as they processed through corridors lined with servants and courtiers, all of whom had come to witness the impossible fairy tale of a kitchen servant becoming their queen. But as they reached the chapel doors, Eleanor felt all her nervousness melt away, because there, at the altar, stood the man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had chosen her when she was nobody, who had fought for her when the world said she wasn't worth the battle. The Alpha King wore ceremonial robes of midnight blue, but his eyes were only for her as she walked down the aisle. The golden thread between them blazed to life, visible to everyone present as she moved toward him, each step bringing her closer to the life she'd never dared dream of. When she reached the altar, he took her hands in his, and the gathered crowd seemed to disappear. There was only him, only her, only the love that had transformed them both. "You look magnificent," he murmured, his voice soft enough that only she could hear. "So do you," she whispered back, drinking in the sight of him. "Are you ready for this? Really ready?" "I've been ready since the moment I saw you." His thumbs brushed across her knuckles. "The question is, are you ready to be stuck with me for eternity?" Elena's smile was radiant. "I can't think of anywhere I'd rather be stuck." The ceremony began, ancient words spoken in voices that carried centuries of tradition. But when it came time for their personal vows, Elena felt the full weight of the moment settle over her. "I promise," she said, her voice clear and strong, "to stand beside you not just as your queen, but as your partner. To use my voice to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. To remember always where I came from, and to never forget that love, real love, sees worth where others see nothing at all." Her voice grew softer, more intimate. "You saved me from a life of invisibility and gave me a crown of love. You showed me that I was never nothing. I was just waiting to become everything to the right person." When he spoke his vows, his voice was thick with emotion. "I promise to protect not just your body, but your heart, your dreams, your beautiful spirit that has already made me a better man and will make me a better king. I promise to see you, really see you, every day for the rest of our lives." He squeezed her hands gently. "You saved me from a life of loneliness and gave me my heart's home. You are my crown, my kingdom, my everything that matters." The kiss that sealed their marriage was witnessed by the entire realm, but Elena felt as if they were alone in the world. Magic sparked between them, the golden thread of their bond now permanently woven into something that would last beyond lifetimes. The celebration that followed was magnificent, but Elena found herself most moved by the small moments. The way the castle servants, her former colleagues, beamed with pride as she danced her first dance as queen. The way common folk had gathered outside the chapel, cheering for the woman who had risen from their ranks to sit on the throne. As the evening wound down, Eleanor found herself on the palace balcony overlooking the kingdom spread out below. Her husband joined her, his arms coming around her from behind as he pulled her against his chest. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "The simple life, when you could disappear into the kitchen and no one expected anything from you?" Eleanor leaned back against his solid warmth, feeling the rightness of it in her bones. "Never," she said without hesitation. "I was never truly alive until I met you. I thought I was living, but I was just surviving. Now." She turned in his arms, looking up into storm-grey eyes that held her world. "Now I have a life worth living, a love worth everything, a purpose that matters. Even when it gets difficult, when the crown feels heavy and the decisions seem impossible. Especially then." Eleanor rose on her toes to brush a kiss across his lips. "Because I won't be facing any of it alone. We're partners now, in everything." He spun her around on the balcony, both of them laughing like the young people they were beneath all the royal responsibility. When he set her down, his expression grew serious. "I love you, Elena, my queen, my mate, my heart." "I love you too," she replied, the words as natural as breathing now. "My king, my partner, my home." They stood together in the moonlight, the golden thread between them glowing softly in the darkness. Elena thought of the frightened servant girl who had dropped a tray just months ago, who had believed herself worth nothing, who had learned to make herself invisible to survive. That girl was still part of her, would always be part of her. But she was no longer defined by fear or scarcity or the cruel judgments of others. She had learned that worth wasn't something given by others. It was something recognised, celebrated, cherished by those who truly mattered. The Alpha King's arms tightened around her as if he could read her thoughts. "What are you thinking about?" "The future," Elena said, surprising herself with the honesty. "Our children, who will grow up knowing they're loved unconditionally. The changes we'll make together, the people we'll help, the life we'll build." "All of that sounds perfect," he murmured against her hair. "But right now I'm just thinking about how lucky I am that you dropped that tray." Elena laughed, the sound bright and joyful in the night air. "Best accident of my life." "Not an accident," he corrected, his voice warm with certainty. "Destiny, fate, the universe finally getting something right." They stayed on the balcony until the stars came out in full glory, talking about dreams and plans and the thousand small ways they would love each other through whatever came next. When they finally went inside, Elena carried with her the absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world, not because of the crown on her head or the title before her name, but because of the love in her heart and the golden thread that would bind her to this extraordinary man for all the days of their lives. The kitchen servant had become a queen. The invisible girl had become the most important person in the kingdom. The woman who had believed herself worth nothing had discovered she was worth everything. And it had all begun with a single moment of eye contact across a crowded room, a golden thread of connection that had proven stronger than class, stronger than doubt, stronger than every force that had tried to tear them apart. Elena fell asleep that night in the arms of her husband, their heartbeats synchronized, their breathing matching, the golden thread between them pulsing gently with the rhythm of a love that would last forever. The servant's crown had become a queen's crown. But more importantly, it had become exactly what it was always meant to be, a symbol of love triumphant, of worth recognized, of two hearts that had found their perfect match in each other. The fairy tale was complete, but the love story, that would last for all eternity.